Robin Hood, Men in Tights hit theaters as one of the last major parody comedies before the genre faded from cinemas. Everyone remembers the songs, the quotes, and the one-liners, but almost no one talks about what really happened behind the scenes. Rushed schedules, legal battles over credits, practical effects tricks, and one audition so electric it launched an unknown performer towards superstardom. These are 25 hidden stories behind a film more crafted and chaotic than anyone expected. And it all starts with a casting call that changed everything. Number 1. The audition that launched Dave Chappelle. Long before becoming one of the biggest names in comedy, a 19-year-old performer walked into an audition that would change his career forever. Dave Chappelle read for the role of Archu, Robin Hood's fast-talking sidekick, and the room knew instantly. Cary Elwes, who helped oversee casting alongside Mel Brooks, later recalled the moment clearly. They saw many actors, but when Chappelle came in, something clicked immediately. Elwes described the reaction in simple terms. They knew right then and there that this guy was a star. Chappelle brought an energy that went beyond just reading lines. His comedic timing was natural, his delivery sharp, and his confidence remarkable for someone with virtually no film experience. The role became his official big-screen debut, and the impact was undeniable from day one. The breakout was so significant that Time magazine reportedly replaced a standard review of the film with a profile on its young newcomer instead. Chappelle went on to appear in The Nutty Professor, Con Air, and Half-Baked, before eventually creating one of the most iconic sketch shows in television history. But it all started here, in a parody movie about a man in tights playing a character named after a sneeze. Number 2. Cary Elwes thought it was a prank call. Getting the lead role started with one of the strangest phone calls in Hollywood history. When Mel Brooks dialed Cary Elwes at home to offer him the part of Robin Hood, the actor assumed someone was pulling a prank. Convinced it was his friend Jim Carrey doing an impression, Elwes hung up immediately. Brooks had to call back and insist it was really him before the conversation could even begin. Once Elwes signed on, his involvement went far beyond just acting. Brooks invited him into the casting process, giving him a say in who would fill key roles. Together, they auditioned performers, discussed chemistry, and shaped the ensemble that would bring the parody to life. Elwes pushed for choices that would add both comedic skill and screen presence, understanding that a spoof lives or dies by its cast. This collaborative approach gave the film a texture that felt personal, rather than factory assembled. Familiar faces like Dom DeLuise and Dick Van Patten, both longtime Brooks regulars, joined the lineup alongside newer talent. Patrick Stewart even appeared as King Richard. The result was a cast built partly on professional reputation and partly on genuine personal connections, a combination that gave the comedy its distinctive energy. Number 3. One line destroyed Kevin Costner. One line in the film got audiences roaring the moment it landed, and it had everything to do with timing. When Robin declares that unlike some other Robin Hoods, he can speak with an English accent, the joke was aimed squarely at one of the biggest blockbusters of the early 90s. Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, starring Kevin Costner, had been a massive hit in 1991, but Costner's attempt at a British accent became one of the most ridiculed performances of the decade. By the time the parody reached theaters 2 years later, audiences didn't need any explanation. The accent issue had been a running joke in pop culture for months, and Mel Brooks knew exactly how to weaponize it. Casting a genuinely British actor in Elwes made the gag land even harder, turning the line into both a correction and a selling point. Marketing leaned into this angle heavily, positioning the film as the version that got it right. What makes the joke endure is how cleanly it captures the relationship between parody and its source material. The line works because it doesn't just mock, it acknowledges something the audience already felt. That shared frustration became shared laughter, and decades later, it remains one of the most quoted moments in the entire movie. Number 4. A kid in a dentist chair started this film. Great ideas in Hollywood don't always come from studios or agents. Sometimes they come from a dental chair. After Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves dominated the box office in 1991, an 11-year-old boy named Geordie Chandler told his father, a Beverly Hills dentist named Evan Chandler, that the film was practically begging to be spoofed. The elder Chandler tucked the idea away and waited for the right moment. That moment came during a routine appointment with screenwriter J. David Shapiro. Chandler pitched his son's idea between checkups, and Shapiro loved it immediately. The two formed an unlikely writing partnership, a dentist and a screenwriter, and together they developed a full screenplay that turned the melodrama of the Costner version into outright absurdity. The script eventually caught the attention of Mel Brooks, who purchased it for a reported $500,000. Brooks heavily revised the material to fit his comedic voice, but the foundation built by Shapiro and Chandler remained intact. The whole project began not in a pitch meeting or a writer's room, but in a dentist's office in Beverly Hills, sparked by an 11-year-old who thought a blockbuster took itself too seriously. Number 5. The writers went to war over credits. Behind the laughs, a serious fight was unfolding over who deserved credit for writing the screenplay. When the script reached the Writers Guild for arbitration, the question wasn't whether the movie was funny, it was who made it funny. Mel Brooks argued that he and J. David Shapiro deserved full screenplay credit, while Evan Chandler should receive only a story credit for originating the concept with his son. The arbitration process is a standard but tense part of the industry. Writers submit drafts, revisions, and notes, and a panel of fellow writers determines whose contribution was substantial enough to earn official recognition. In this case, the final credits landed as a three-way split: screenplay by Brooks, Shapiro, and Chandler, with story credit going to Shapiro and Chandler. Young Geordie Chandler, whose casual remarks started the entire project, was considered for a mention in the credits, but ultimately went unrecognized on screen. Viewers watching the opening titles had no idea any of this happened. The names scrolled past cleanly, giving no hint of the legal back and forth that shaped them. But the dispute reflects a larger truth about comedy filmmaking. Even the silliest movies involve serious business behind the scenes, and credit battles in Hollywood can be just as dramatic as anything on screen. Number 6. Mel Brooks had already failed at this story. Nearly 2 decades before the film reached theaters, Mel Brooks had already tried to crack the Robin Hood legend on television. In 1975, he co-created When Things Were Rotten, a fast-paced sitcom on ABC that turned the heroic outlaw story into a slapstick free-for-all. Starring Dick Gautier as a bumbling Robin Hood and featuring Dick Van Patten as Friar Tuck, the show was packed with anachronistic gags, sight humor, and the same irreverent energy Brooks had brought to Blazing Saddles the year before. Critics generally liked the series, but audiences didn't find it. Competing against powerhouse shows like Little House on the Prairie, the sitcom lasted just 13 episodes before being cancelled. Its mid-season replacement, The Bionic Woman, went on to become a hit, a twist of irony that Brooks probably didn't find amusing. When the 1993 film came together, Brooks recycled a few gags from the old series, including the famous reversed arrow archery trick. He also brought Dick Van Patten back, though not in the same role. Van Patten had hoped to reprise Friar Tuck, but Brooks had already transformed the character into Rabbi Tuckman and cast himself in the part. The movie wasn't just a response to Prince of Thieves, it was the payoff of a creative obsession stretching back almost 20 years. Number 7. The entire film shot in under 3 months. Production moved at a pace that matched the comedy's rapid-fire rhythm. Shooting officially began on January 4, 1993, in Los Angeles, and wrapped by late March, giving the crew less than 3 months to complete principal photography before the film's planned summer release. That kind of timeline is tight for any production, but especially for one filled with choreographed fight scenes, musical numbers, and elaborate costumes. The compressed schedule shaped more than just logistics. It influenced the feel of the finished product. Sketch-style pacing, quick setups, and gags that hit fast and move on all carry the fingerprints of a production that didn't have time to overthink anything. Mel Brooks, a veteran of working under pressure from his years in live television with Sid Caesar, thrived in environments where speed forced decisions rather than endless deliberation. By late July 1993, the film was in theaters, just over 6 months from the first day of shooting. That turnaround included editing, scoring, marketing, and final sound mixing. The tight window meant there was little room for reshoots or major revisions, and the movie carries that energy. Loose, fast, and unapologetically spontaneous in ways that polished productions rarely allow themselves to be. Number 8. England was really California. Sherwood Forest didn't require a trip across the Atlantic, just a drive 35 miles north of Los Angeles. The outdoor scenes depicting the forest, the spring fair, and the castle were all filmed at Sable Ranch in Santa Clarita, a sprawling property in the Santa Monica Mountains that had served Hollywood productions for decades. Its rugged canyon landscapes and open fields made it a natural stand-in for medieval England without ever leaving Southern California. Interior scenes were shot at Warner Hollywood Studios in West Hollywood, a location that carries its own piece of Robin Hood history. The same studio lot was used to film Douglas Fairbanks' Robin Hood back in 1922, making the parody a direct geographical descendant of one of the legend's earliest and most iconic screen versions. Even the water had history. Lake Sherwood, located nearby in the Santa Monica Mountains, was originally known as Lake Canterbury before being renamed in 1921 after Fairbanks filmed Robin Hood scenes on its shores. The 1938 Errol Flynn adaptation later used the same lake as a backdrop. When the parody returned to that same body of water decades later, it became part of a filmmaking lineage stretching back to the silent era. Number 9. The comedy had professional sword training. Even in a comedy built on absurdity, the action had to look real. Mel Brooks insisted the fight sequences carry genuine physical weight, understanding that parody works best when the thing being spoofed is executed convincingly. As he put it in the making of documentary, if you're putting Robin Hood's name on a marquee, you owe the audience horses and sword fighting. That philosophy drove the cast into weekend rehearsals running through Saturdays and Sundays for the duration of the shoot. Overseeing the training was fencing coordinator Victor Paul, a veteran stunt professional who had worked on major action films including Die Hard. Paul found that Cary Elwes was a particularly fast study, thanks to the extensive sword training the actor had already undergone for The Princess Bride. The other cast members required more work, but the commitment was universal across the ensemble. The result is a film where the climactic duel between Robin and the Sheriff of Rottingham feels genuinely exciting, even as the jokes keep coming. Elwes even landed a real bullseye during the archery scenes, despite Brooks giving him only 3 takes to nail it. The pressure was real, the training was serious, and the physicality on screen reflects all of it. Number 10. A hospitalized actor, almost filmed from his bed. Near the end of production, one of the lead actors fell seriously ill, and the director's response was pure Mel Brooks. Richard Lewis, who played the neurotic Prince John, was almost finished with his scenes when he was suddenly hospitalized with hepatitis A. His fever reportedly spiked to 106 degrees, leaving him bedridden and unable to return to set. He had just 2 lines left to deliver. Brooks, completely undeterred by the medical reality, called Lewis's hospital room with a plan. The idea was to lay Lewis on a stretcher, drive him to the set, prop him up against some wood, let him say his 2 remaining lines, and rush him straight back to the hospital, all within 20 minutes. It was the kind of scheme that sounds like a deleted scene from one of Brooks's own movies, and Lewis recounted the story years later with obvious affection for the absurdity of it all. Whether the plan was ever seriously attempted, or simply remained a running joke between director and actor, the anecdote captures something essential about how the production operated. Deadlines didn't pause for emergencies, and Brooks handled stress the same way he handled everything else, with humor. Number 11. The Cliffs of Dover were a Malibu miniature. When Robin Hood swims back to England in the film, the audience sees the famous white cliffs of Dover rising above the shoreline. Except none of it was real. The entire shot was created using a foreground miniature, a classic filmmaking technique that places a small-scale model close to the camera to blend with the live-action background. The actual location was Paradise Cove in Malibu, with a small England sign perched on top of the fake cliff to complete the illusion. The man responsible for setting up the shot was Robert Latham Brown, the film's production manager, who had previously worked on major productions like Return of the Jedi, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and Spaceballs. Brown later described the experience of working on the film as one of his most enjoyable, largely because of the people involved. What makes the moment work is that it operates on 2 levels simultaneously. For viewers who don't notice the trick, it simply looks like a wide shot of the English coast. For those who catch the miniature or the hand-painted sign, it becomes another layer of comedy built into the filmmaking itself. The gag costs almost nothing, and it captures the resourceful, handmade spirit that runs through the entire production. Number 12. The witch's best line was completely unscripted. One of the film's most memorable moments wasn't written in any draft of the script. It came straight from an actor's instinct in the moment. When the Sheriff of Rottingham crashes through the roof and lands in Latrine's room, the witch, played by Tracy Ullman, delivers a line that audiences never forget. After narrowly missing a romantic encounter, she looks directly at the camera and adds an improvised remark that Mel Brooks found so funny he kept it in the finished movie without hesitation. Ullman had built a reputation for exactly this kind of fearless spontaneity. Brooks gave her room to experiment throughout production, and she took full advantage of it. Her approach to Latrine went beyond simply reading the script. She inhabited the character with a physical intensity and comedic boldness that elevated every scene she appeared in. The same spirit of on-set improvisation extended to other performers as well. The scene where the sheriff crashes into Latrine's room was reportedly improvised almost entirely by Roger Rees and Ullman together, with Brooks simply watching and deciding what worked. This willingness to let actors play, and to recognize when unscripted moments were better than written ones, gave the comedy a looseness that rigid productions rarely achieve. Number 13. The Wandering Mole divided critics. Throughout the film, a small detail on Prince John's face quietly becomes one of its most divisive gags. Richard Lewis's character has a mole that changes position from scene to scene, starting on his left cheek, migrating to his chin, his lip, his right cheek, and eventually landing in the middle of his forehead. The gag is a direct callback to the shifting hump on Igor's back in Young Frankenstein, recycled here with the same deadpan commitment that made the original work. Critics were split on whether this kind of recycling was clever homage or creative laziness. Some reviewers praised the mole as one of the film's subtler running jokes, one that rewarded repeat viewings and attention to detail. Others saw it as evidence that Brooks was leaning too heavily on his own back catalogue instead of generating fresh material. The gag also served as a gentle spoof of Alan Rickman's visible mole in Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, adding another layer of parody on top of the self-reference. The debate around the mole reflects a larger conversation about how Mel Brooks's comedy style evolved over the decades. Whether that shift represents decline or adaptation depends entirely on the viewer. What's undeniable is that the mole remains one of the most discussed visual details in the entire movie, which for a tiny piece of makeup is a remarkable achievement. Number 14. Brooks kept a deleted actress on the payroll. Behind one of the film's smallest on-screen moments lies a story of unexpected generosity. A then-unknown actress named Chase Masterson was originally cast in a speaking role as Prince John's companion, with a specific joke referencing a popular television show of the era. She built a rapport with Mel Brooks during auditions and was excited to join the production. But when editing began, Brooks realized the joke might not age well, and her scene was cut from the final version. Rather than simply letting the role disappear entirely, Brooks made a decision that Masterson has called heartwarming ever since. He kept her visible in the background for just long enough to qualify for on-screen credit and residual payments. When he broke the news at a restaurant reception, he framed it with characteristic humor, telling her there was good news and bad news. The bad news was the scene was gone. The good news was he'd left her in just enough so she could still get paid. Those residuals, according to Masterson, have continued arriving ever since, making them her favorite recurring checks in the industry. In an industry where deleted scenes typically mean deleted paychecks, the story stands out as a rare moment of personal kindness from a director who understood that behind every small role is a real person depending on the work. Number 15. Half the songs were already written. Musical numbers have been a Mel Brooks signature since the very beginning of his career, and the film carried that tradition forward with a mix of original compositions and borrowed material. Brooks personally wrote the lyrics for the title song performed by the Merry Men, the ballad sung by Maid Marian, and both versions of the Sherwood Forest Rap. Composer Hummy Man provided the melodies, crafting an orchestral score that one critic compared favorably to the legendary swashbuckler scores of the Golden Age. Not everything was created from scratch, though. The romantic ballad Robin serenades Marian with, a lush, Dean Martin-style number, was actually written in 1937 by Dana Suess, Billy Rose, and Irving Kahal. It's a genuine classic standard, dropped into a medieval parody without any irony, which is precisely what makes the moment work. The melody of the title song itself also borrows from an earlier Brooks composition used in History of the World, Part 1, recycled here with slight modifications to fit the new lyrics. The actors didn't perform their own vocals either. Professional singers dubbed the musical sequences, with Debbie James voicing Marian and Arthur Rubin standing in for Elwes. The result is a soundtrack that sounds polished and grand, while serving a movie that's anything but serious. Number 16. The box office story nobody tells. Despite what some people assume, the film was far from a commercial failure. Made on a budget of $20 million, it opened on a Wednesday in late July 1993 and debuted at number 6 at the weekend box office with a gross of $6.8 million, a figure that reportedly left 20th Century Fox thrilled. By the end of its theatrical run, the movie had earned $35.7 million in the United States and Canada alone, with international earnings pushing the worldwide total to $72 million. The real story, though, happened after theaters. Mel Brooks himself has said that this film and Spaceballs are his two best-selling titles on home video, and that distinction tells you everything about how the movie found its true audience. VHS rentals, cable broadcasts, and later DVD releases kept introducing new viewers year after year. What transformed a modest theatrical performer into a beloved cult comedy was longevity, not spectacle. The film didn't need a massive opening weekend to prove itself. It needed time, and time delivered. Over 3 decades later, the movie's cultural footprint has grown far larger than its opening numbers ever suggested was possible. Number 17. The reviews that aged terribly. When the reviews came in during the summer of 1993, there was no consensus, just loud disagreement. Gene Siskel of the Chicago Tribune awarded the film half a star out of 4 and called it deeply disappointing, arguing that the pacing dragged and the jokes felt recycled from earlier, better work. Rita Kempley of the Washington Post was equally harsh, describing it as a pointless lampoon from a filmmaker whose instincts were fading. On the other side, there were voices willing to acknowledge what worked. Karen James noted that the funniest moments showed Brooks hadn't lost his sharp, irreverent edge. Peter Rayner of the Los Angeles Times offered a more balanced take, praising the grab-bag energy of the best scenes while admitting that parts of the movie felt dutiful. Rotten Tomatoes now shows a 42% approval rating from critics, with Metacritic settling at 44 out of 100. What critics couldn't predict was how differently parody ages compared to other genres. Jokes that felt recycled in 1993 became nostalgic touchstones by the 2000s. Russell Crowe himself, star of yet another Robin Hood adaptation, called it the most entertaining version of the character's story in 2016. Time didn't just soften the critical reception, it essentially rewrote it. Number 18. The commentary track that survived 3 formats. Buried inside the film's home video history is a commentary track that has quietly survived across 3 decades of format changes. Originally recorded for the 1994 Laserdisc release, the Mel Brooks audio commentary was later carried over to the DVD and Blu-ray editions, becoming one of the longest-traveling bonus features in home media history. It's the same recording, unchanged, passed from one format to the next like an artifact no one wanted to retire. The commentary itself is more conversational than technical. Brooks has a tendency to describe what's happening on screen as though the viewer can't see it, and he occasionally sets up punchlines before they arrive, undercutting his own jokes in the process. Reviewers of the Blu-ray release have noted that the track isn't his most informative work, but it carries a warmth and looseness that feels like sitting next to the director while he watches his own movie and can't help talking through it. In an era when streaming platforms routinely strip bonus features from their catalogs, having a commentary that has survived from Laserdisc through DVD to Blu-ray is increasingly rare. It's a direct line to the filmmaker's voice, recorded close to the time of release, providing a snapshot of how Brooks felt about the movie before decades of cult appreciation reshaped its reputation. Number 19. French money quietly saved the budget. Listed quietly in the opening credits alongside Brooks films is the name Gaumont, one of the oldest and most established film companies in France. Their involvement wasn't cosmetic. As a co-financing and international distribution partner, Gaumont helped stabilize the budget and guaranteed the movie would reach audiences across Europe and beyond. It's the kind of arrangement that rarely gets attention, but is essential to how mid-budget comedies get made. International co-financing was especially important for a film like this, where domestic box office performance was uncertain. A parody of an American blockbuster didn't automatically guarantee overseas interest, but having a European partner already in place meant distribution deals were secured before the cameras ever started rolling. Gaumont had previously worked with Brooks on Spaceballs, so the partnership was already tested and trusted by both sides. Without Gaumont's involvement, the film might have faced a smaller budget or a more difficult road to production. It's the invisible infrastructure that keeps movies like this alive before audiences ever see them. Number 20. The HBO special nobody remembers. Before the film reached theaters, HBO aired a promotional special titled Robin Hood, Men in Tights. The legend had it coming, hosted by Cary Elwes. Running just over 26 minutes, it was designed as a standard marketing piece, a behind-the-scenes preview meant to build excitement for the upcoming release. What nobody anticipated was that this throwaway promotional segment would become one of the most valuable pieces of production history attached to the film. Elwes guides the viewer through the set, speaks with cast members during filming, and captures a version of the production in motion that no retrospective interview could replicate. The footage shows actors between takes, crew members preparing setups, and Brooks directing in real time, the kind of raw, on-location material that becomes increasingly precious as the years pass. The special was later included as a bonus feature on both the DVD and Blu-ray releases. Together with the Laserdisc commentary and a newer 13-minute featurette, these extras form a surprisingly complete picture of how the film was made, marketed, and remembered. Promotional content, when preserved, can accidentally become the most authentic record a production ever leaves behind. Number 21. Not every country saw the same film. Not every audience around the world saw exactly the same version of the film. Rated PG-13 in the United States for off-color humor, the movie received different classifications depending on the country, and those classifications sometimes came with adjustments. Certain territories required edits to innuendo-heavy scenes involving the chastity belt or suggestive visual gags, while others left the film completely intact. The result is that multiple versions exist across international home video releases, with slight runtime variations that most viewers never noticed. Columbia TriStar handled distribution in many territories outside the United States, releasing the film on VHS, Laserdisc, and DVD from 1994 through 2002. Different regional distributors meant different masters, different subtitle translations, and occasionally different cover art. Small changes that added up to a patchwork of releases across dozens of markets. Jokes aimed at American audiences in 1993, parodying a Kevin Costner blockbuster, referencing The Godfather, spoofing network television, required different framing depending on where the movie was shown. The film audiences saw in France, Germany, or Australia wasn't always identical to the one playing in American theaters, and that quiet variation is part of how international comedy distribution actually works. Number 22. The chastity belt was an engineering feat. One of the most memorable running gags in the film revolves around Maid Marian's Everlast chastity belt, a steel contraption branded like boxing equipment, complete with a lock that drives the entire third act. What audiences saw as a joke was actually a carefully constructed prop that had to function on multiple levels. It needed to look convincingly metallic on camera, be comfortable enough for Amy Yazbek to wear across weeks of filming, and produce the right sound effects when characters interacted with it. The prop team designed the belt to be both visually absurd and physically practical. It had to appear rigid and imposing in close-ups, while remaining flexible enough for Yazbek to move, sit, and perform physical comedy without restriction. The Everlast branding was stamped onto the prop to sell the anachronism, turning a medieval concept into a modern product joke. Every scene involving the belt required coordination between wardrobe, props, and sound departments to make the gag land consistently. Beyond the comedy, the chastity belt became the film's most iconic visual symbol, appearing on promotional materials, home video covers, and fan art for decades afterward. It functions simultaneously as a costume piece, a plot device, a product parody, and a character joke. That kind of layered functionality doesn't happen by accident. The belt is a small masterpiece of comedy engineering disguised as a sight gag. Number 23. The lake was named after a Robin Hood film. The name Sherwood Forest on screen was fictional, but the location where it was filmed carries a real and surprisingly deep connection to Robin Hood's cinematic history. Much of the outdoor footage was shot at Sable Ranch in Santa Clarita, California, but the more remarkable location is Lake Sherwood in the Santa Monica Mountains, a body of water whose very name exists because of Robin Hood movies. Originally called Lake Canterbury, the lake was renamed in 1921 after Douglas Fairbanks filmed scenes for his silent Robin Hood on its shores. The name stuck, and the lake became permanently associated with the legend it had only temporarily hosted. When Errol Flynn starred in The Adventures of Robin Hood in 1938, production once again used the same lake. By the time Mel Brooks arrived in 1993, Lake Sherwood had already been part of Robin Hood filmmaking for over 70 years, a location literally named after the fiction it helped create. This geographic continuity places the movie inside a physical lineage stretching back to the silent era, connecting a 1993 parody to a 1921 adventure through the same California landscape. A comedy mocking Robin Hood was filmed in a place that only exists, by name at least, because Robin Hood movies made it famous. Number 24. The characters read their own script, on screen. During the archery tournament, one of the film's centerpiece sequences, something happens that no traditional Robin Hood adaptation would ever attempt. After Robin loses the contest when his opponent splits his arrow in two, he stops the scene entirely. Confused and frustrated, he reaches under his chair, pulls out a physical copy of the screenplay, and begins flipping through the pages to check whether the outcome is correct. He discovers that, according to the script, he's supposed to get another shot. The joke escalates when Prince John and the Sheriff of Rottingham pull out their own copies of the script and reluctantly confirm that Robin is right. The entire scene pauses, not for a dramatic beat, but for the characters to consult their own movie's written instructions. It's a fourth wall break so complete that it doesn't just acknowledge the audience, it acknowledges the screenplay as a tangible object that exists within the world of the film itself. What makes this moment endure isn't just the absurdity, but the precision. Brooks understood that fourth wall humor works best when it's committed to fully, rather than hinted at. The scene arrived years before self-referential humor became a mainstream comedy staple, predating the wave of meta-comedies that would dominate the 2000s and 2010s. It executed the technique so cleanly that it became one of the most referenced examples in comedy history. 25. Fans still put on the tights. Over the decades since its release, the film has crossed a threshold that most comedies never reach. It became something audiences don't just watch, but actively recreate. School drama departments have staged unauthorized adaptations. Halloween groups have coordinated full Merry Men costumes, complete with choreographed dance routines. Convention floors regularly feature fans dressed as Rabbi Tuckman, Blinken, or Archu, quoting dialogue with the accuracy of people who have watched the movie dozens of times. The songs are a major reason this happened. The title number, with its catchy melody, easy-to-learn lyrics, and built-in choreography, gave fans a performance piece they could replicate without professional training. Unlike most movie musical numbers, it was designed to look like amateurs performing, which made amateur recreation feel authentic rather than awkward. The costumes help too. Tights, tunics, and pointed hats are cheap to assemble and immediately recognizable, lowering the barrier between watching the film and embodying it. What transforms a cult comedy into a participatory tradition is repeatability, and this movie was engineered for it, whether Brooks intended that or not. More than 30 years after its release, the film continues to generate new fans who discover it through older siblings, parents, or internet clips. And many of them don't just quote the jokes, they put on the tights. What keeps Robin Hood, Men in Tights alive after more than 3 decades isn't nostalgia alone. It's the discovery that real craftsmanship hid behind every silly moment. Choreographed sword fights trained on weekends. A prop department that engineered a chastity belt to function as costume, plot device, and product parody simultaneously. A miniature cliff built on a Malibu beach to fake the white cliffs of Dover. A screenplay born in a dentist chair, fought over in arbitration, and eventually handed to its characters to read on screen. Beneath the tights and the puns, there was a production that took its own absurdity seriously. And that effort is what separates a forgettable joke from a lasting one. If you've made it this far, you probably have a favorite line, the one you still say out loud even when nobody around you gets the reference. Drop it in the comments because there's a good chance someone else has been waiting to hear it. And if you enjoyed this video, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.